What kind of person parks their SUV across a farm road just to prove a point? The kind named Karen Whitaker, president of the Sunny Acres Homeowners Association, who decided my humble stretch of dirt was her personal battleground. I'm Caleb Morrow, a third-generation farmer, and that road, my road, has been the lifeline to my fields for decades. It's not just dirt. It's where my grandfather hauled hay, where my father taught me to drive a tractor, where I've poured my sweat into keeping this land alive. But Karen, with her manicured nails and her clipboard of HOA rules, didn't care about any of that. She rolled up one crisp October morning, her silver SUV gleaming like a tank, and parked it sideways across the road, blocking my access to the south field. I was hauling a load of pumpkins for the market, my old truck creaking under the weight, when I saw her standing there, arms crossed, smirking like she'd just won a war. "This road's a safety hazard, Caleb," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "HOA regulations state it needs to be paved, and until you comply, it's closed." I stared at her, my hands tightening on the wheel. Closed? My road. The audacity hit me like a slap. I'd been paying HOA dues for years. Even though my farm predated the fancy gated community she lorded over. Sunny Acres used to be open fields, but developers carved it into cul-de-sacs and McMansions, and Karen's HOA had been squeezing me ever since, nitpicking my fences, my barn, even the way I stacked my hay. But this was personal. I stepped out of the truck, the dust swirling around my boots, and asked, "You're telling me I can't get to my own field?" Her smirk widened. "Rules are rules, Caleb. Maybe if you'd attended the last meeting, you'd know." I wanted to laugh, but the pumpkins in my truck were due at the market by noon, and every minute she stood there cost me money. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the spark that would set everything ablaze. I'd always tried to keep the peace. When the HOA first formed, I joined to avoid trouble, even though my farm wasn't part of their cookie-cutter neighborhood. I paid their dues, gritted my teeth through their complaints about my roosters crowing too early, and nodded when Karen sent letters about curb appeal. But her SUV blocking my road was a line crossed. I walked up to her, keeping my voice steady. "Karen, this road's been here longer than your HOA. You can't just shut it down." She waved her clipboard like a scepter. The board voted, "Caleb, unpaved roads are a liability. You'll get access when you pave it." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Pave it? With what? The farm barely broke even most years. I'd spent my savings keeping the tractor running and the crops alive after last year's drought. She knew that. Everyone in Sunny Acres knew the Morrows were hanging on by a thread. But Karen didn't care about struggle. She cared about control. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Move your car, Karen. I've got work to do." She didn't budge. "File a formal complaint if you want. Until then, this road's closed." She turned back to her SUV, climbed in, and cranked the AC, leaving me standing in the dust. I drove back to the farmhouse, my mind racing. The pumpkins would rot if I couldn't get them to market, and I'd lose the contract with the co-op. I couldn't afford that. Not now. Not when the bank was already breathing down my neck about the mortgage. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cracked linoleum, and pulled out the old property deeds my father had left me. That's when I noticed something, a detail I'd overlooked for years. The road Karen had blocked wasn't just mine by tradition, it was mine by law. My grandfather had bought the strip of land in the 1950s, a narrow easement that connected the farm to the county highway. The HOA had no jurisdiction over it. I owned it outright. A slow smile spread across my face. Karen thought she could bully me into submission, but she didn't know I held the trump card. I grabbed my phone and called my old friend Tom, a lawyer who'd grown up on the farm next door. "Tom," I said, "I need you to check something for me." Tom confirmed it the next day. The road was mine, free and clear. Not only that, but the HOA's own bylaws gave me leverage. Sunny Acres relied on my road for access to their back gate, a shortcut they'd been using for years without my permission. I could close it off, charge them for access, or, better yet, use it to turn the tables. I spent the next week digging deeper, meeting with Tom in his cluttered office, poring over maps and contracts. That's when the idea hit me. The HOA was a corporation, and like any corporation, it had assets. One of those assets was the small administrative office they leased from the county, a building that sat on a parcel adjacent to my road. If I could buy that parcel, I'd have them by the throat. It was a long shot, but I called the county clerk, cashed in a favor, and found out the parcel was up for auction in 2 weeks. I didn't have much, but I had enough equity in the farm to take out a loan. I went all in. The auction was a blur. I sat in the back, my hands sweaty, as Karen and her HOA cronies strutted in, unaware I was even there. They thought they were bidding on the parcel to expand their precious community center. I outbid them, dropping every penny I could scrape together. When the gavel fell, I owned the land under their office. Karen's face when she saw me sign the papers was worth every sleepless night. She stormed over, her heels clicking on the courthouse floor. "What do you think you're doing, Caleb?" I looked her in the eye, calm as could be. "Just protecting my property, Karen. You should understand that." She didn't know the half of it yet. I wasn't just protecting my road. I was about to rewrite the rules of her game. I spent the next few days planning my move. Owning the road and the parcel gave me power, but power's only as good as how you wield it. I wasn't out for revenge, at least not entirely. I wanted justice, not just for me, but for every small farmer and working-class family the HOA had steamrolled with their petty rules and fines. Karen and her board had turned Sunny Acres into a dictatorship, squeezing people like me to prop up their vision of suburban perfection. But I wasn't some pushover they could intimidate with a clipboard. I had the deed to the road, the land under their office, and a plan to hit them where it hurt, their wallets. Tom helped me draft a letter, formal and airtight, informing the HOA that I was the legal owner of the access road and the parcel. I also notified them that, as the new landlord, I was tripling the rent on their office. If they wanted to keep using my road, they'd pay a toll, $500 a month per household. I mailed the letter certified, imagining Karen's face when she opened it. The response came faster than I expected. Karen called a special HOA meeting, and I was invited via a terse email that read like a summons. I showed up at the community center, a sterile building with fake wood paneling and fluorescent lights. The board sat at a long table, Karen at the head like a queen holding court. About a dozen residents filled the folding chairs, some curious, others glaring at me like I was the villain. Karen stood, her voice dripping with condescension. "Caleb, you've caused quite a stir with your little stunt. Care to explain why you think you can extort this community?" I stayed calm, leaning back in my chair. "I'm not extorting anyone, Karen. I'm charging for access to my property. You've been using my road for years without permission. And that office you're sitting in? I own the land it's on. Check your mail." The room went quiet, the air thick with shock. Karen's face reddened, but she recovered quickly. "This is absurd. The HOA has easements. You can't just..." I cut her off, sliding a copy of the deed across the table. "I can and I am. You want to talk rules? Let's talk about how you've been fining people into bankruptcy over mailbox colors while you trespass on my land." The meeting erupted. Residents shouted questions, some at me, some at Karen. A retired mechanic named Ed, who'd always been kind to me, stood up. "Is this true, Karen? You knew the road wasn't ours." Karen stammered, her composure cracking. "We assumed it was community property." Caleb never objected. I laughed, low and bitter. "You never asked, Karen. You just took." That's when the twist came, one I hadn't seen coming. Ed pulled out a crumpled letter from his pocket, his hands shaking. "I got this from the bank today," he said. "They're foreclosing on my house because I couldn't pay the HOA fines you piled on me last year. I trusted you, Karen. We all did." The room turned on her. Faces that had been skeptical of me now glared at her. Ed's voice broke as he continued. "My wife's sick, Caleb. Those fines were for a shed I built to store her medical equipment. They said it wasn't up to code. I'm losing everything." My stomach twisted. I'd known the HOA was ruthless, but this was cruelty dressed up as bureaucracy. I stood, my voice steady but loud enough to cut through the chaos. "This is why I'm doing this. Not just for me, but for all of you who've been crushed by her rules. I'm not the enemy here. She is." Karen tried to regain control, banging her gavel, but the room was done with her. Residents started sharing their own stories. Fines for kids' bikes left in driveways. Liens on homes for unpainted fences. The HOA wasn't a community. It was a machine, and Karen was its operator. I saw my opening and took it. "I'm offering a deal," I said. "Pay the toll, and I'll use the money to help folks like Ed. or fight me in court and lose everything when I shut down your office and your precious back gate." Karen's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. She knew I had her cornered. That night, I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. The pumpkins were still in my truck, but I'd found a buyer willing to pick them up from the farm. I wasn't out of the woods yet, but I'd landed the first blow. Karen, though, wasn't done. The next morning, I woke to find her SUV back on my road, this time with a tow truck and a sheriff's deputy. She'd called in reinforcements, claiming I was obstructing a public right-of-way. The deputy, a young guy named Martinez, looked uncomfortable as Karen ranted about my illegal toll. I handed him the deed and Tom's letter. "This is my land, deputy. She's trespassing." Martinez read the documents, scratching his head. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "he's right. You need to move your vehicle." Her jaw dropped. "You're siding with him?" Martinez shrugged. "I'm siding with the law." For the first time, I saw Karen falter, her confidence crumbling as the tow truck driver hooked up her SUV. Karen didn't take defeat lightly. By noon, she'd rallied her loyalists on the HOA board, and they filed an emergency injunction to block my toll and challenge my ownership of the road. Tom warned me this was coming. "She's got money and connections," he said over coffee at the diner. "But you've got the law on your side. Don't back down." I wasn't planning to. The farm was my life, my legacy, and I'd be damned if I let Karen bulldoze it. I spent the next few days gathering evidence. Old photos of my grandfather building the road, county records showing the easement, even testimonies from neighbors who remembered when the Morrows were the only ones out here. The hearing was set for Friday, and the whole town was buzzing. Sunny Acres wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a battlefield, and I was the underdog everyone was watching. The courthouse was packed, standing room only. Karen sat with her lawyer, a slick guy in a tailored suit who looked like he charged by the syllable. I had Tom, who wore a rumpled blazer and a grin that said he loved to fight. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Hargrove, called the room to order. Karen's lawyer went first, spinning a tale about how my toll was extortion and my ownership claim was a fraudulent attempt to destabilize the community. He waved around a survey that allegedly showed the road as public property. I glanced at Tom, who winked. We'd seen that survey. It was outdated, predating my grandfather's purchase. When it was our turn, Tom laid out the facts, the deed, the county records, the HOA's own bylaws. He showed photos of Karen's SUV blocking my road, time-stamped and notarized. "This isn't about community," Tom said. "It's about one woman's vendetta against a farmer who dared to stand up." The room murmured, and I saw heads nodding in the crowd. Ed was there, sitting in the back with his wife, Ellen, who looked frail but defiant in her wheelchair. I'd learned more about their story since the HOA meeting. The fines Karen had slapped on them weren't just petty, they were targeted. Ed had challenged her at a board meeting last year, questioning her budget for a new fountain while the community's drainage system failed. Karen didn't forgive dissent. She'd buried them in fines until they couldn't pay, and now their home was on the line. My fight wasn't just about the road anymore. It was about people like Ed and Ellen, who'd been chewed up by a system that valued power over compassion. The twist came mid-hearing, and it hit like a thunderbolt. Karen's lawyer called a surprise witness, my cousin, Derek, who'd moved to the city years ago. I hadn't spoken to him since our falling out over the farm's inheritance. He'd wanted to sell it to developers. I'd fought to keep it. Now, here he was, testifying that our grandfather had verbally promised to give the road to the county before he died. My heart sank. Derek was lying, and I knew why. Karen had gotten to him, probably with a fat check to fund his failing real estate business. The betrayal stung worse than anything Karen had done. This was family. I leaned over to Tom, whispering, "He's lying. There's no promise." Tom nodded, calm as ever. "We've got this." He cross-examined Derek, tearing into his story. No written agreement, no witnesses, just a vague claim from a man who hadn't set foot on the farm in a decade. The judge wasn't impressed. "Mr. Morrow," she said to Derek, "your testimony lacks credibility." Karen's face tightened as the judge ruled in my favor. The road was mine, the toll was legal, and the HOA's injunction was denied. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others muttering angrily. Karen stormed out, her lawyer trailing behind. I should have felt triumphant, but Derek's betrayal lingered like a bruise. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the stars, wondering how it had come to this. The farm was safe for now, but Karen wasn't done. She'd lost in court, but people like her don't stop. They regroup. I knew the real fight was coming, and it would be uglier than anything we'd seen yet. Karen's next move was predictable but brutal. She couldn't block my road anymore, so she went after my livelihood. The HOA sent letters to every vendor I worked with, claiming my farm was non-compliant with county health codes. They didn't have proof, but the damage was done. 2 buyers canceled contracts, worried about getting tangled in a legal mess. My pumpkin crop, already delayed, was now at risk of rotting in the field. I drove to the co-op, pleading my case, but the manager just shook his head. "Caleb, I can't take the risk. Karen's got friends at the county." I felt the ground slipping out from under me. The farm was my life, but it was also my debt, $200,000 to the bank, with payments I could barely make. If I lost the vendors, I'd lose everything. I wasn't the only one hurting. Ed and Ellen's foreclosure was moving fast, and other neighbors started coming to me with their own stories. A single mom named Maria had been fined for her kid's trampoline. A veteran named Carl was facing a lien for parking his RV in his driveway. Karen's HOA was a hydra, and every time I cut off one head, another grew back. I called a meeting at my barn, inviting anyone who'd been burned by her rules. 20 people showed up, more than I expected. We sat on hay bales, the air smelling of straw and motor oil, and they poured out their frustrations. Maria cried as she talked about selling her car to pay fines. Carl said he'd rather live in his RV than bow to Karen's demands. Ed, his voice hoarse, said, "Caleb, you're the only one who stood up to her. What do we do?" I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. We had to fight together. I laid out a plan. The HOA's power came from its budget, funded by our dues. If we stopped paying, we could starve them out. It was risky. Non-payment could lead to liens, but I'd already tripled their office rent and the road toll was bringing in cash. I promised to use every penny to help cover legal fees for anyone who joined me. "We're not just fighting for my road," I said. "We're fighting for our homes, our lives." The group agreed, and we formed a coalition, calling ourselves the Sunny Acres Resistance. It felt dramatic, but it fit. We were at war. Karen caught wind of it and doubled down. She organized a counter meeting, inviting the whole neighborhood to discuss Caleb Morrow's dangerous actions. I crashed it, bringing Ed, Maria, and Carl. The community center was packed, the tension thick as fog. Karen stood at her podium, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "Caleb's toll is tearing this community apart," she said. "He's holding your access hostage." I stood up, holding a stack of papers, copies of every fine she'd issued in the last year. "Karen, let's talk about tearing things apart. How about the $5,000 you fined Maria for her kid's trampoline? Or the $10,000 you slapped on Ed for a shed to help his sick wife?" The crowd gasped. Karen tried to interrupt, but I kept going, reading off names and numbers. "You've been bleeding us dry to fund your fountains and your power trips. I'm done. We're done." The room exploded, residents shouting, some at Karen, some at me. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that breaks things open. By the end of the week, half the neighborhood had stopped paying dues. Karen's board scrambled, sending threats of lawsuits and liens, but Tom was ready. He filed a class action suit on behalf of the resistance, accusing the HOA of predatory practices. The local paper picked up the story, and suddenly Sunny Acres was front-page news. Farmer versus HOA. The battle for a rural road. Karen's perfect image was cracking, and I could see the panic in her eyes when we passed each other at the gas station. She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke volumes. She was losing control, and she knew it. The showdown came at the annual HOA election. Karen had always run unopposed, her board a rubber stamp for her agenda. But this year, the resistance put up candidates, me for president, Maria for treasurer, and Carl for secretary. We didn't have Karen's polish or her connections, but we had something better, people. The community center was standing room only, the air electric with anticipation. Karen took the stage first, her speech polished but desperate. She painted me as a greedy opportunist, said my toll was dividing neighbors. I let her talk, knowing her words were hollow. When it was my turn, I didn't hold back. I told the story of my road, my grandfather's legacy, Ed and Ellen's foreclosure, Maria's kids who couldn't play in their own yard. This HOA was supposed to bring us together, I said. But under Karen, it's torn us apart. I'm not here to fight her. I'm here to fight for you. The vote was close, but we won. I became president, Maria and Carl took their seats, and Karen was out. She didn't go quietly. She stormed out, vowing to sue, but the crowd didn't care. They cheered, some even hugged me. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone. But victory came at a cost. The farm was still bleeding money, and the lawsuit Tom had filed was draining what little I had left. Worse, Derek called me that night, his voice slurred with whiskey. You think you're a hero, Caleb? You're gonna lose that farm, just like I said. Karen's not done with you. His words hit hard, not because I feared Karen, but because he was right about the farm. I was fighting for everyone else, but I might lose my own home in the process. The next morning, I found a notice from the bank taped to my door. The loan I'd taken to buy the parcel was due, and I didn't have the cash. Karen's vendor sabotage had cut too deep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the numbers, my chest tight. I'd won the HOA, saved Ed's house, helped Maria and Carl. But what about me? The farm was my soul, and losing it would be like losing myself. That's when Maria showed up, unannounced, with a check in her hand. The resistance took up a collection, she said. It's not much, but it's a start. Behind her, Ed and Ellen pulled up, then Carl, then a dozen others. They'd pooled their money, $10 here, $50 there, to help me keep the farm. Tears stung my eyes as I tried to thank them. You fought for us, Ed said. Now we're fighting for you. Karen's downfall was complete when her own board turned on her. 2 members resigned, leaking emails showing she'd misused HOA funds for personal expenses, trips, catering, even a new car. The lawsuit against her gained traction, and the county launched an investigation. She moved out of Sunny Acres a month later, her SUV gone, her house listed for sale. The neighborhood breathed easier, but I knew the real work was just beginning. As the new HOA president, I slashed the dues, rewrote the bylaws to protect residents, and used the road toll to fund drainage repairs and a community garden. The farm was still on shaky ground, but with the resistance behind me, I had hope. Rebuilding Sunny Acres wasn't easy. The HOA's finances were a mess, tangled in Karen's schemes and years of mismanagement. Maria dug into the books, uncovering padded contracts and missing funds. We held open meetings, inviting everyone to see the numbers and weigh in on decisions. Transparency became our mantra. The road toll, once a weapon, now funded scholarships for kids like Maria's, who dreamed of college. Carl organized a veterans support group, meeting in the community center we'd saved from Karen's grip. Ed and Ellen's house was safe, thanks to a legal fund we'd set up with the toll money. Every step felt like a small victory, but the weight of the farm's debt never left me. One evening, as I was fixing a fence, a car pulled up. It was Derek. I braced myself, expecting another fight, but he looked different, sober, tired, human. I messed up, Caleb, he said. Karen offered me money to lie about the road. I was desperate. I wanted to be angry, but I saw the shame in his eyes. He'd lost his business, his pride, everything. Why are you here? I asked. He handed me an envelope. It's not much, but it's what I have left. For the farm. Inside was a check for $5,000. Peanuts compared to my debt, but it was all he had. I didn't know what to say. Family was complicated, but maybe it wasn't too late for us. Come by for coffee sometime, I said finally. He nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope for us too. The community garden became our symbol of renewal. We planted it where the old fountain had been, tearing out Karen's vanity project for something real. Neighbors who'd never spoken to me before showed up with shovels and seeds. Kids ran through the rows, laughing, while their parents swapped stories of surviving the HOA's reign. I watched from the sidelines, my hands dirty from planting, and felt something I hadn't in years, pride. Not just in the farm, but in what we'd built together. The road, once a battleground, was now just a road again, connecting us instead of dividing. But the bank wasn't sentimental. They wanted their money, and I was still short. I started selling off equipment, my father's old plow, a trailer I'd hoped to restore. It hurt, but it bought me time. Then, at a town hall, the mayor approached me. The county had followed our fight, and they wanted to feature the farm in a rural preservation program. If I agreed, they'd cover half my debt in exchange for keeping the land agricultural. It wasn't a full fix, but it was a lifeline. I signed the papers that night, my hands shaking. The farm would survive.